Hey, real quick, before we get into the subject matter of the video, I just wanted to let you guys know that as far as upcoming classes and that kind of stuff is concerned, uh, out in mid-January here, we're coming out to Adairville, Kentucky, and we're going to be running a Pistol 1 and 2 class. Almost immediately after that, we'll be going down to Paisley, Florida for Rifle 1 and 2. So for those of you that are excited for me coming down to Florida, because I constantly get messages to come down and train in Florida, you can go ahead and sign up through there. We're going down to the full spectrum warrior range, which is really neat. It tests your equipment pretty good. After that, we're getting ready to go to take ourselves to Eastman, Georgia, for those of you who have been hounding me for Georgia classes and that kind of stuff. We still have slots open for that as well. That's also a Rifle 1 and 2 class. And then we have ourselves a shotgun class out in Adairville, Kentucky. And the last one that we did, there was just about everybody that went to it bought a shotgun for that class. They learned a lot of good stuff. There it is. And I might be missing a class or two on the schedule, so you'll have to look. Link in the description below. But also in April, we're going out to Nevada. Winnemucca, Nevada, for a Pistol 1 and 2 class. So for those of you in California that want to participate in that kind of stuff, that have been messaging me about it, or guys that have been hounding me to come out west, well, we're coming out west, and that's in April. So you can finally let her know what to get you for Christmas, because she's been bugging you all month and the last 2 months. So let's get into the review now. Now, these have been released for a little while now. These are the Xtech magazines. Right, they were developed by a company that has revealed themselves, obviously, in the last year or so, and they've been turning out very U.S. Palm-esque looking magazines that have a significant number of improvements to them. Now, I've been involved in testing these things since before they came out. My relationship with the Xtech magazine guys is with both a tester and evaluator that's out there, as well as the owner of said company. Now, they decided they were going to send out magazines to me because, you know, they seen my video on basically calling out Magpul on a bunch of bullshit regarding their AK mags and how fragile they are, regardless of what improvements they've made. So they decided they were going to send out a few to me, and I told them, look, if you do that, I'm gonna give you honest evaluation on everything. And the beginning that I had with these magazines, as far as testing them and that kind of thing, was actually not very promising, right? What we began to see very, very quickly was this is very atypical, run-of-the-mill American AK something producer, and it was of shoddy quality. What I mean by shoddy quality is that things like this used to happen. And we were breaking off tabs constantly. I was shearing things, and there were a bunch of things that I had to say about the particular magazine, because the first time I came back to them, I said, look, as far as the magazine quality goes, and this is like their first run of magazines and that kind of stuff, before they were even produced, I told them, look, we got to fix some stuff here. We really do. We got to fix a lot of things here, because we're breaking, namely, rear tabs off of stuff, and because there were things that I personally saw were going to be issues right out the gate. Now, before, it used to not be a solid tab like this. It used to be a little piece of polymer with a metal skirt around it. Now, that little metal skirt still exists, but now there is a solid steel tab, and there's a pretty good bracing system along the spine of the magazine, which actually really does help with how durable that individual tab is. But the first thing that I saw when I saw their original production run was that still just a polymer tab. The little metal skirt didn't do shit. It broke off very, very easily. What they did have was they had the design principles from the US Palm Mag bodies, which are very, very strong. And much like a lot of polymer mags that are out there, if there's a certain amount of flex in there, they take impacts very well. The common analogy that I put out for that is that metal or steel magazines, while they're still really good, also have memory, right? Good polymer magazines have dementia. They can just take hits and what happened? That never happened. So we were very, very brutal on mag body testing and that kind of thing. My buddy Josh was involved in this a lot, and we were just sitting there just heaving magazines, loaded mags, just to see what it would take to crack the feed lips, because the feed lips are steel reinforced as well, something I've been preaching that Magpul should be doing. It took a retarded amount of stuff, like an unreasonable amount of shit, to finally crack the feed lips of the magazines, which is good because there is a bracing system that's very robust that supports the feed lips of these magazines, and that was out the gate, right? So these tabs needed to be improved, right? So as far as them needing to be improved and that kind of stuff, before I even thought about a review and that kind of thing, I came back to him because I had a negative result. And I was just like, look, I hate negative reviews. I have done them before, but I hate negative reviews. Would you like me to just provide a bunch of data for you instead? They said yes. So I gave them a whole bunch of stuff that I personally would look for as far as a AK magazine and that kind of thing, especially with 30 caliber AK magazines, because a lot of stuff has to be paid attention to as far as weight distribution, how they impact, that kind of stuff. So they didn't exactly take, well, I'm going to back up. At first, they were sitting there a little resistant because they were like, well, we've done all this testing and all this lab stuff and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, I got you, but I'm breaking the shit out of them in the one weakness that I can find very easily. And part of that testing process was to throw a loaded magazine into a gun. And it survived drop testing like without a hitch, sitting here dropping them like so and just diving them onto concrete from head height. I needed like 18 drops to get them to finally break, or to get the feed lips to crack. That's a lot. And amidst that whole dropping process, they were retaining ammunition until the feed lips cracked. Duh. So great, but those tabs were going to be an issue. So we put loaded magazines into guns, and we did this on clay, we did this on gravel, and then finally we did it on concrete, where we would just be standing with a magazine in the gun, drop straight into the prone on the concrete, and yes, that hurt like hell because we had to do it 4 or 5 or 6 times per magazine that we got. Now, I'm at the point where if it's by like the 6th drop, you get some warping on that tab, I'm okay with it, right? Because that's a lot of stress to throw onto that specific tab, because when you drop straight onto it, it puts a lot of camming force on that tab. Problem with the early runs was that it would happen on the 1st or 2nd, right? Something that steel magazines have no problems with whatsoever, even if you dent floor plates on them and that kind of shit, which we did. So that's the thing, is that, we went back to them, and at first, again, they were a little resistant because they'd done a shitload of testing, especially full auto stuff. And when I showed them, or explained rather, how easy it was to defeat their magazines with something very similar, especially, dudes in ninja suits and long tabs and shit that will end up using AKs in foreign countries to start counterinsurgencies and all this other shit, right? They're going to end up using these guns. And if they end up with these magazines and you start getting shot at, the first thing that you do is fling your ass into the floor, for most guys, especially if you're in the open. So explaining that, they were just kind of like, oh, well, okay. And I'm going to be honest with you, at first, they just kind of looked at me and they said, okay, cool, we'll look into it. I took that as a fuck you, right? Like, I immediately took that as a fuck you, fuck everything you're about. We're going to be like the vast majority of American-made AK stuff, and that we're just going to be okay with being crap. We'll ride off of the U.S. Palm stuff and that kind of thing and go from there. But they didn't do that. They sent me a second iteration of their magazines, and those were harder to defeat, but we beat those. That same prone out test, it was like on the third or fourth, and then they sent me their latest iteration, stuff that's on the shelves and that kind of shit right now. And if I can get these to fail, which most of the time I don't, but they sent 4 to me. Out of those 4, I decided to do drop testing or prone out testing on 2 of them. One is in circulation. It's actually this one, and it's still doing just fine. And I did bend the tab on the other one at number 6. That's a lot of shit to put a polymer magazine specifically through. So I was very happy with that. Never mind the fact that, okay, well, mag bodies are still very tough. And you can disassemble them. There's a takedown notch for their floor plates and that kind of thing. Now, I'm going to challenge you guys to get in their ear and talk about this, because I discussed something that would actually be very beneficial to these individual magazines, because you can remove these floor plates and tell them, look, a lot of AK guys will receive something that they never thought that they needed if you introduce this. And one of the suggestions I made was, okay, this floor plate here, if you could remove this and replace it with a polymer-lined, a rubber-lined polymer floor plate, it would reduce a lot of that impact shock. Also, a lot of guys have issues on flat, hard surfaces with like 30 caliber AKs specifically with sliding, because if you base your magazine into a hard surface like concrete or asphalt or something like that, a lot of guys have problems with slipping. And they have to readjust themselves constantly and that kind of thing. And the response I got from that was, we absolutely really would love to as a additional option, but we do have to sell units in order for us to properly research that and that kind of thing. So, which I do understand, okay? Like, if you pour ass loads of time and research into making a fairly solid magazine better, you are going to have to recoup some of that before you can start researching additional shit that's better. Also, I told them, do 545 magazines. You will kill with them. Even if you have to make the improvements that you made off of this guy, and then go ahead and sell them at like $25 or even $30, right? Because if it's $30, that's still cheaper than like Bakelite, Circle 10, and all that other shit, unless there's some guy on arms list trying to get rid of a whole bunch of shit because he's broke, right? So, having talked with them back and forth and that kind of thing, they seem genuinely interested in constantly improving their products, and really they have. Now, let's talk about the set of their latest magazines that they sent to me, right? I killed one of them in the prone out testing, but the other 3 have been going through class after class after class, and this set right here, the most modern set, right? Because, as by the way, previous iterations of their magazines, I would keep them in rotation, because there were some that I didn't do that drop testing on, and there's some that I did, and the ones that I did, I broke tabs off of, right? So I would rotate the newest ones in along with the older iterations of them and that kind of stuff. And the older iterations, while doing class after class after class, was not just me doing demos and that kind of shit, but with students, right? The older iterations of stuff would start to run into problems at a certain point, depending on what gun they went into. Like with short AKs and Jacketed Hollow Point Wolf, for instance, right? Like all AKs, if there's some goofy shit happening, chances are you have that ammo in your magazines. Short AKs with Jacketed Hollow Points do not like these magazines, like, at all. The older iterations, much more so. With these, it'll cycle, but for some reason it gets hung up on the last round. Now, that might be not very attractive to a lot of people, but a lot of guys that do a lot of AK stuff are just kind of like, well, I only buy ball anyway, so that's not as big of a factor to me. And to a point, that's where I'm thinking about it too, right? To where I'm on ball constantly, so it's not really that big of a deal for me. Now, with the newest set that I have, I've been paying very close attention to these 3, and they seem to just do AK shit. They just keep running and they keep running and running and running, which is fine, right? I'm becoming more and more of a fan of these. I do have a couple of criticisms on them. Number one, they have to shave this, like the waffle pattern on the mag bodies of these. Yeah, I get it. You're your own company and that kind of stuff, but you will never, ever, ever get rid of that. Oh, well, it's just a slightly better U.S. Palm tagline if you keep, everything going on with them. Also, there's a utilitarian reason to want to shave all this down anyhow, or at least shave this down and then keep the pattern, just make the whole thing skinnier. And that is, with these magazines, especially on like chest rigs and that kind of stuff that don't have like a polymer lining in them, like the D3 stuff that Haley puts out, getting these back into a magazine pouch, especially on the chest, is kind of like putting a wet napkin in a filing cabinet, especially if it's wet outside. It is a colossal pain in the ass, and it requires a little bit of cussing in order to do, right? So I personally, if I were to make improvements on them further, I would just shave these down and that kind of shit, right? So, also that rubberized floor plate thing, man, if that were to come out, right, on this, it would give, like I said, a whole lot of AK dudes a whole bunch of shit that they didn't even know they wanted until it arrived. Okay. Now, I'm not saying put on like a thin layer of bitch rubber on here. I mean like a good, robust, like very AK-ish stuff, okay? Like a good, robust damn lining on top of a floor plate here, on top of a polymer floor plate. And it might even make the ass end of these things just a little bit taller. But, man, it would just be a lot easier. It would just be a lot easier. And let me back up. It's not so much that it's easier. It's just magically more convenient. Just one of those little quality of life improvements that people are going to like. So now, having tested these and having run them for a while, they're obviously this has been going on for 15 minutes, but having been involved in the testing and evaluation process before they came out, I felt the need to talk about that entire process. Now let's talk about whether or not I would recommend these to people. The first thing that I'm going to say is that as far as American-produced AK magazines are concerned, right, these are the best ones. Now, there's a lot of people that are saying that Century is going to resurrect U.S. Palm and that kind of stuff. I am very, very, very skeptical for anything that Century touches. Okay, anything that they have a hand in, I am very skeptical. It could be very, very quickly found out that after they start selling U.S. Palm magazines again and that kind of thing, what ends up happening is that they change the chemical compound of the polymer, and now it's just a softer, shittier product. It turns itself into a really beefy Tapco magazine, as a for instance, right? So where that goes remains to be seen. But even if this is all it stayed, was improvement on the rear tab and on the front, and on the simple fact that there is a steel reinforcement around the feed lips here. Because look it, man, as far as reinforcements on magazines and that kind of stuff is concerned, okay, even on steel magazines, there are steel reinforcements on the feed lips of steel fucking magazines. Okay, so guys that are claiming that, oh, well, steel reinforcements on the feed lips lead to bending and that kind of stuff of the feed lips. Well, of course, if you drop them enough, you will. And you might also crack some stuff. But it is much more difficult to get there. So anybody that tries to push that kind of shit is not very smart as far as AK stuff, in my book, okay? Especially since, dude, even the steel magazines have steel reinforcements on the goddamn feed lips, and it runs all the way up them, okay? This is not very hard. So, as far as an American-produced magazine is concerned, right now, these are the best. Now, would I place other magazines in front of them? Me personally, while I certainly am not ashamed to pop these out and use them and that kind of stuff, I do have to say that I do have magazines that I prefer over these. The waffle pattern magazines for sure, the Circle 10s on 30 caliber AK mags. I absolutely prefer those. I absolutely prefer Bakelite magazines. And depending on a couple of circumstances, I still prefer steel magazines for a variety of things. Now, what is kind of neat about this is that it's subtle because we're talking about magazine weight here. But if you're used to comparing magazine weights and that kind of stuff, these are significantly lighter. Which, when these are loaded, they're around about 2-ish pounds. Having a little bit of weight loss is kind of a nice quality of life improvement. Plus, you can take this apart and service it and that kind of shit, right? So, I'm not gonna knock it. They seem very interested in improving their products and that kind of thing. But if the simple fact that I showed up here talking about how they sent me stuff and how I was evaluating it from the get-go and now I'm doing a review automatically turns you off to whether or not this is even valid for you, I totally understand that. But the reason why I decided I was going to get invested in this in the first place is simply because, well, it's an American company trying to do AK stuff well, and we need more of those people. So if I could lend a hand in helping that along, I'm absolutely down, right? So would I prefer these over the Magpul magazines? Fucking hands down, easily. As far as market pricing and that kind of stuff, they're very comparable anyhow, and these are far more robust. And those of you that pull magazines off of back pockets and belts, the width issue here is absolutely not a factor. These fit very well into every single AK that I've tried, as a no by the way, right? So I would pay attention to that as well, because whether or not it's Romanian, Chinese, Bulgarian, or Russian, and we've tried all of those, it doesn't give a shit. It'll go right into it and it'll feed it and that kind of stuff. Even a shitty Serbian thing like a PAP, it'll fit into those just fine and run. So, and as a note, by the way, the correct amount of wiggle room in there too. They're not so stiff that you're probably going to break them, and they're not fucking like constantly making the gun talk every time you take a step because they're so loose. They fit in there very well. They do their job. They cycle ammo, all of that stuff. So, me personally, if I was to recommend magazines to people, certainly Bakelights, Circle 10s, the new Bulgarian steel production magazines that are floating about, surplus East German steel magazines that are floating about, absolutely. The steel reinforced Bulgarian polymer magazines that are floating around too, that are not waffle pattern. Those work good. And on top of that, I'm going to recommend these for people that want to get an AK started and do it well. So, that's all I have on this, guys. Remember, like I said early in the video, there's a schedule out, and I mentioned a whole bunch of stuff that's upcoming. If you want to go ahead and come out and train with us, you absolutely can. If you want to support us on Patreon, you can absolutely do that too. We use that for products, and we also use it to train up soldiers and whatnot. I've been pulling guys from my unit to show them what actual small arms training is versus a lot of the bullshit that they've gotten. On top of that, you could also join the $35 a month program and help yourself too, because that allows you to take as many classes with us as possible without anything else really. As long as you're signed up for that $35 a month program, you can shoot me an email, be like, hey, I want this. If there's a slot open, I'll get it to you. It's no big deal, and that's a good way for you to train over and over and over without a retarded upfront cost. And after your first set of 2 classes, it starts paying for itself, because my full price for my class system is $250 per 2 days. So all you have to do is a little bit of math, and that works out in your favor really fast. It's a system designed to be abused. So that also, if you want to check us out on Facebook, you totally can. If you want to buy a hat from us, you absolutely can. A hat with one of these little friggin' logos on it and that kind of stuff. All of that is in the link in the description below, and you'll probably see a couple of little windows up here. So, with all that being said, guys, remember, regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.